The Monaco Grand Prix taking place on the 22nd of May 1977. The six-wheeled Tyrrells perform well in the warm-ups. Let's get on board. Three main events marked the race. The first pole of John Watson's career, the debut for a young Italian, Riccardo Patrese, in a shadow, and the return of Jackie Ickx at Ensign. He was replacing Clay Regazzoni for this race, while he was competing at Indianapolis in the 500-mile event. Well, right at the start, Jody Scheckter bounded from second place on the grid to take the lead, which he hung on to until the end. Well, the Tyrrells, despite their good warm-ups, were unable to prove themselves in the race. Peterson abandoned in the 10th lap and Depay in the 47th. Well, a few laps later, and it was Watson's turn to disappear, let down by his transmission. That left the way open for the two Ferraris to go after second and third places. Lauda in front of Reutemann. Mas, Andretti and Alan Jones in the shadow completed the list of drivers in the points. In the championship, incredible as it may seem, Scheckter had got away and now had a 7-point lead over Lauda, 9 over Reutemann and 10 over Andretti. Yes, the Wolf team just kept producing surprises. Well, the drivers had to shake themselves up to deal with the situation that no one could have foreseen in Belgium. On the circuit at Zolder, the Lotuses seemed to have returned to strength. That allowed Mario Andretti to take a legendary pole, the fourth in his career. Well, completing a lap in 1:24.64 at an average of 181.276 kilometers per hour, he left John Watson with a second best time, 1.5 seconds behind. Well, further proof of the Lotus superiority, Gunnar Nielsen qualified in third place, 1.8 behind the leader. The time differences behind him were enormous. At 2.2, Hunt at 2.4, Lauda at 2.5. Well, it looked as though we were heading for a new demonstration from Andretti, in the same vein as the Spanish Grand Prix. But on this 5th of June 1977, one element upset the works: the weather. Well, it was pouring at the start, and perhaps upset to have been surprised by Watson at the green light, Andretti was to commit one of the biggest errors of his career as he rushed to attack the Irishman. After just 2 kilometres of the race, the two drivers have to abandon after they collide. Well, on the skating rink at Zolder, it was then Scheckter who laid down the law. Behind Scheckter, Gunnar Nielsen, who'd been told by Colin Chapman to attack if ever anything happened to Andretti. Well, he kept up with the pace in front of Jochen Mass. He was giving his all. Well, the rain soon stopped and they all had to stop to put their slicks on. Scheckter chose that moment to spin. Nielsen didn't seize the chance immediately since he chose to go into the pits. That to change his tyres, a wise tactic which allowed him to pull back in front of one of his adversaries afterwards. While Jacques Laffite had to withdraw with engine problems, Nielsen soon only had Lauda in front of him, and the inevitable happened, 21 laps from the finish. Nielsen overtook the Ferrari and went to take his first and only Grand Prix victory. By finishing second, Lauda returned to just 1 point behind Scheckter in the championship. The Anderstorp circuit was the site of the Swedish Grand Prix. Two of the drivers wanted at least to produce the same results, Reutemann and Andretti. For the latter, it seemed to start all right when he once again took pole, outclassing his adversaries, even if the differences were not as great as in Belgium. Nielsen, despite basking in the glory of his victory, could only take 7th time on the grid. Laffite, well, he said he was worried. Said the tyres are getting very hot, a bit concerned about the race. The result of the warm-ups, Watson was on the front row, Stuck third. On the other hand, it was all going wrong at Ferrari. Their V12 was not suited to the circuit. Reutemann was only 12th at the end of the qualifiers, and Lauda 15th. Well, this was at the same time when the best driver in the fields, in the top team, could lose 10 places or more from 1 week to the next. It was very close. Well, everything was ready for a great race, even if Andretti was expected to win. He led for the first laps and started to build up a lead. At that point, Jacques Laffite was only in 11th place, just in front of Lauda. Well, this was a waiting race played by the Frenchman, who only had a single car to his name. The reason was Ligier had preferred to reserve all their material for the following Grand Prix, which was to take place in France. In front, Andretti continued his superior drive. Nielsen was in front of him, but not on the same lap. He only had Watson and Scheckter behind him, keeping up some faint hope. But Watson and Scheckter, well, they were to collide in the 30th lap, which released a few hungry appetites. And that is the moment when Laffite decided to show his colours. Catching and overtaking his adversaries one by one. You might have to pinch yourself to believe it, but 5 laps from the finish, Laffite was second, having overtaken Stuck, Reutemann, Mass, De Piet and James Hunt. Suddenly, 4 laps from the end, Andretti's Lotus disappeared into the pits for a short refuelling. It was either that or run out. And so the Ligier Matra found itself in the lead. Laffite didn't let up and won his first Grand Prix victory. An historic day for French motorsport, but no Marseillaise was played on the podium. The organisers had foreseen everything except a French victory. Well, when they held up the P1 board, he says, I thought they'd made a mistake, but then I realised I could go on and win. I'm very pleased. Well, proof of Laffite's unexpected victory were the few witnesses to it. The Swedish Grand Prix took place on the same day as the Le Mans 24-hour race, and only a handful of French journalists were present. Well, the pictures you've just seen really are a document. The director of the Blue Team, Guy Ligier, had not gone himself either. Too busy preparing for the French Grand Prix. Well, he learned the news in his car. That was the first time that an entirely French car, apart from the tyres, had won a Formula 1 Grand Prix, and Laffite became the 4th French driver after Maurice Trétignon, François Sévère and Jean-Pierre Beltoise to win a race in the World Championship. Well, the warm-ups were marked by a new pole for Andretti in front of Hunt, Nielsen and Watson. Jacques Laffite took a magnificent 5th best time, whilst Emerson Fittipaldi had to be content with last place on the grid, quite something for a double world champion. Well, John Watson took the lead from the start and began to get away. Behind him were James Hunt and Mario Andretti. Lafitte was fourth in front of Nielsen, Lauda and Scheckter. Well, the stands on the circuit at Dijon-Prenois were packed. Almost 80 laps were on the programme. The scenario was to be the same as that in Sweden, except that this time Andretti was to be the beneficiary rather than the victim. While Jacques Lafitte made a mistake and had to concede 2 laps after a bump, which meant he had to return to the pits, Watson was still in the lead on the 78th lap, but in the 79th, despair for the Irishman. Handicapped by a fuel gauge problem and with a heavy heart, he had to let Mario Andretti pass in the last lap. Watson managed to hang on to his second place, but he was deeply disappointed. Hunt was third, Nielsen fourth, Lauda and Reutemann only fifth and sixth. A very eventful British Grand Prix for the 10th round of the 1977 World Championship. A young French driver, Patrick Tambay, was making his debut at the wheel of an Ensign Ford entered by Theodore Racing. Well, he qualified brilliantly in 16th position. The other beginner in this Grand Prix, none other than Gilles Villeneuve, who at the wheel of the old McLaren M23 managed the real feat of qualifying in 9th position. A great friendship installed itself between the two young drivers, who would see a lot of one another, both on and off the track. Well, this was also the official debut for the Renault F1s. It opened a new era in the world of car racing. Everybody knows that the original thing about this project was that the engine was boosted by a turbo compressor. Well, by virtue of an equivalent coefficient fixed at 2 by the International Sporting Commission and compared to a 3-litre atmospheric engine, the cylinder capacity of this engine was reduced to 1.5 litres, or more precisely, 1,420 cc's. As a result, in England, no one believed that the project could succeed. As well as this wager from Renault, Michelin were also present with a radical shell tyre, another premiere in Formula One. Nonetheless, Jean-Pierre Jabouet qualified in an encouraging 21st place, 1.7 seconds behind Hunt's pole. Well, the race was marked by a duel between Watson and Hunt, with Lauda as the referee. Well, for some, the Watson-Brabham Alfa Romeo package was even stronger than the Andretti Lotus Ford Cosworth. But although Andretti had already won 3 times during the season, the same could not be said of Watson, who was to fail yet again. Jean-Pierre Jabouet in the Renault abandoned in the 17th lap with turbo failure. Only to be expected, perhaps. As for John Watson, well, he waited until the 61st lap to abandon, leaving James Hunt the pleasure of winning on home ground. And once the checkered flag was lowered, the crowd invaded Silverstone. The communion between Hunt and the crowd was complete. Very emotional it was too.